need to order, and we can take we can take action on the agenda in minutes when Tom lets me know we have a quorum to do so. But I guess we'll go ahead and get started. Grace, is that all right?
Yeah, that sounds great. Thanks, Carrie.
Okay.
So Tom, what's the final count? Do we have a quorum yet, or skip the meeting and agenda approval and come back to it?
Yeah, we don't have close to enough. We have like 8 or 9.
Okay. Yeah, maybe we can circle back to that at the end if we have more people join.
Sounds good.
Okay, and I'll hand it off to you, Carrie.
Okay, well, you see the meeting objectives today in front of you. We're going to take a look at the executive summary and that in the draft plan. Review any comments that we need to before we perform the test of consensus on that draft plan. And we'll go through, I know I personally had questions about, all right, remind me about how this process works and so forth. So if you do have questions, we are going to go over the process a little bit. We will also review the 2-page draft concise summary that was sent out earlier this week or last week. I can't remember when. We'll talk about our preparations for our public meeting, and we're also going to go over the membership term limits and where we're headed with that. So skipping over the agenda and the minutes, newsworthy items. Grace?
Yeah, so on May 15th, there was a Water SC work group meeting. What's shown here are the 3 main topics that were discussed: interbasin transfers and multi-state water management considerations. I heard from the Catawba Water Management Group, and then there was a panel discussion from the councils of government. So I was not at this meeting. Scott, or I don't know if Joe's on the line, if you want to share any part of the discussion that might be worth sharing with the RBC.
Just 2 comments, I guess. There was it seemed to me a lot of concern on the South Carolina over the IBT in North Carolina. So there's a lot of interest there. So that's going to be a topic closely followed over the next several years for sure. And then the second takeaway I got out of that is that they're going to focus on there's a conversation towards the end of the meeting about focusing on the River Basin Council work. So that's kind of led to next month's meeting, or this month's meeting, to have the chairs and vice chairs be on a panel and talk a little bit more about the river basin planning. So that's slated for this month's meeting. So there's kind of the 2 takeaways I got out of it anyway. So that's helpful.
Great, thanks, Scott. Anyone have any question on that? I'll just show then this we added after talking with Carrie earlier this week, just also noting that the next Water SC work group meeting will be held on June 19th. So I believe Carrie and Ken will be attending that.
Right, as Scott just mentioned, that month's meeting includes a panel discussion with the RBC chairs. So just wanted to let you all know that the lower Savannah-Salkehatchie RBC will be represented by either Ken or myself.
Great. Okay. Next, if there are any members of the public or agency that would like to make a comment, now is the opportunity for that. All right, then moving on to discuss the final edits to the draft plan and the executive summary. So I circulated at the end of last week and then again yesterday, slightly revised executive summary as well as the comment log. So if you open up the comment log, you can see any of the changes that were made between Friday and the version I sent yesterday. There were just a few edits to the executive summary. I think nothing major. One was a suggestion from Ken that I think is really helpful. Of at the beginning of the document, we talk about the 4 questions that the plan aims to answer, talking about what the current uses are, what future uses are, and is there enough water? So just at the end of the assessment of water availability, coming back to those questions and giving a high-level answer. So anybody reading it can pick that out. So if you opened up the log, you saw that there are a couple of comments that aren't resolved. So that's what we're going to discuss next. And we can figure out how we're going to finalize that question before moving on to the test of consensus. So that's the discussion of some terminology for what is called recycled water programs, or the use of reclaimed water or reclaimed wastewater. But before we get into that, does anyone else have any questions or comments on how their comments were addressed?
Yeah, I have a question. I don't know if it was addressed, but we, in the second half of the RBC planning, we talked about, well, when we started, we had a surface water model, and then we were going to have a groundwater model. We never got the groundwater model, but we really don't say that. We just say in one of our recommendations we need it. Why don't we say in the plan that this is based on hypothesis of groundwater? We really don't have a model to confirm the hypothesis.
Yeah, so we did address that comment. Let me just pull up the log quickly.
Okay.
Okay, so we added some additional language at the start of chapter 5, and then there's also some language, from chapter 5, there was some language addressing that. So we added that into the executive summary as well. And then we note it again on page 24 of the executive summary. So let me just now go to where that is. Okay, so now right at the start of the water availability assessment, we talk about how we had surface water quantity models to do this analysis, but no calibrated groundwater model was available during this initial planning period. However, groundwater resources were evaluated by considering historical trends and aquifer levels, et cetera. And then down where we talk about groundwater, this sentence here, that the aquifers that underlie the basin are capable of transmitting large volumes of groundwater to support projected demand, but in the absence of testing demand scenarios with the calibrated groundwater model, this evaluation is an informed estimate, and it's difficult to predict what shortages may exist in future scenarios.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you for that comment, Ken. I felt the same way, so I'm glad you brought that up, and thank you all for addressing that.
Yeah, thank you. All right, anyone else? Okay.
Grace, can you switch back? Can you switch your display settings back?
Oh yeah, thank you. Okay. So the next piece of discussion is about terminology used to talk about recycled water programs or the use of reclaimed water or wastewater. And in the original drafts of the chapters that we had sent out, we used these terms interchangeably. And if you look at the comment log, you'll see that the unresolved comments, we initially received comments from Ken and Pete asking that we be consistent in the terminology with the use of recycled water. So then the next drafts that we sent out made that change where we're consistently using recycled water to refer to this. After the last meeting, Bill had expressed some concern with using the term recycled water and suggested that reclaimed wastewater or potentially reclaimed water might be a more suitable terminology to use throughout this. So that's what we want to discuss today.
And then I suggested in my last comments that at the first use of the term recycled water, we define it as recycled water, comma, also known as water reuse and water reclamation, or whatever the comma. And then that way it's upfront in the first instance of use.
Yeah, so that was Ken's recommendation. We've had additional discussions too with Pete and with DES. So one approach we could take is what Ken suggested, where we stay consistent with using recycled water throughout, but define it up front that it also refers to these things. Another way that we could approach this is what you see up here is the definition from the National Water Reuse Association. And it uses both of these terms, recycled water and reclaimed water, but it makes a distinction in which term you use when you're referring to different parts of a recycled water program. So if you don't mind me just reading this off to you, recycled water generally refers to treated domestic wastewater that is used more than once before it passes back into the water cycle. The terms reused and recycled are used interchangeably depending on where you are geographically. Versus reclaimed water isn't reused or recycled until it is put to some purpose. It can be reclaimed and be usable for a purpose, but it doesn't become recycled water until somebody actually uses it. So this is just a little schematic to try to show where each term would be used in this water wastewater cycle. So we have potable water use in the beginning, what's returned, the wastewater flows are sent to a wastewater treatment facility. That treated wastewater effluent is discharged to the environment, or it could be sent for additional treatment processes where it could then be turned into reclaimed water that's suitable for another purpose. Then when that reclaimed water gets put to a use, whether it's for irrigation or industry or something in residential use, then that becomes recycled water. So just looking ahead for a second, we wanted to pull out some of the key instances where this terminology comes up in the plan so that everyone understands what the context is that these terms would be used in. So first in chapter 6, that's where we introduce the water management strategies that the RBC evaluated. So how it's currently written in the plan now is the use of utility provided recycled water for irrigation or other uses. It then goes on to describe recycled water programs as for using highly treated wastewater for other beneficial purposes. We also talk about recycled water for use in irrigation. And then in chapter 7, when we move from all of the water management strategies to those actually selected by the RBC, we again refer to utility provided recycled water. We refer to recycled water programs, those that are already implemented. And then the last main instance it comes up is in chapters 9 and 10 for the recommendations and implementation. The RBC voted on this final language of under strategy 6, so that the technical understanding of water management issues, that DES performs studies and analyses in support of a recycled water statute in South Carolina. And when this was discussed by the RBC with this language, that was given a high priority. So with that background, thinking about possibly this distinction of using different terms in different places, we wanted to bring this discussion back to the full RBC to see if anybody else wants to weigh in on preferences. And if you noted on the agenda, we just set aside 15 minutes for this discussion. So we want to give it the time that it deserves to see if we can come to some kind of agreement, but we don't want to get bogged down for too long in the discussions. So with that, I'll open it up if anyone wants to make a comment on this.
I mean, I really like what you're showing here, Grace, and I don't think there's any, ultimately really a better source of info or for the definition than the Reuse Association. And we refer to the state chapter of the Reuse Association in the plan. So it would be nice, I mean, in my perfect world, it'd be nice to include this and possibly as well as include what Ken was recommending. I think you could have both. We're just we're just giving further information by showing this water reuse definition and the graphic. I think in a plan like ours, which is really highly graphical, it's got great visuals in it. This would be a great graphic to include. I assume we have to cite the Reuse Association, but that'd be in favor.
Yeah, this was a a little screenshot markup by me just for this
Okay.
presentation. So we'd have to do something, but we could work with a graphic designer to make it our own.
We certainly could make our own.
Yeah, Grace, this is Bill Robertson. I disagree with it fully, and I can tell you why for two reasons. First of all, I would prefer the definition in the state of South Carolina code. In the state of South Carolina code states that it has a definition for reclaimed water. It says that reclaimed water, that all piping that's reclaimed water has to be labeled reclaimed water, not recycled water. There is no definition for recycled water. So you're using an agency that's not part of the state. This is a industry agency that's defining, and their whole purpose is water reuse. And so instead of the state code plainly says, and it says what you say here. I'll read it to you. The term, this is in a state reg 619505. It says, reclaimed water systems is a method of advanced wastewater treatment designed to produce an effluent of such high quality to be suitable for irrigation in other areas with public contact, such as yard irrigation and public open spaces. And then earlier it says that piping shall be clearly marked reclaimed water. It says shall. Shall means that's not an option. So why are we renaming it? It's defined in the code. The second reason that I disagree with it is I read all 5 plans that are ahead of us, or 6 plans, I guess. We're the only ones doing this. Everyone else calls it reclaimed water. We're the only RBC that's not doing it. The PD changed it a little bit, and they called it reclaimed water for reuse and recycling, but they still call it reclaimed water. We mention, everyone else mentions recycled water for car washes, and they mention it some around 4 to 20 times. We mention it 69 times. That doesn't make sense to me. We are so out of alignment with the other RBCs that it's just glaring to me. We're out of alignment with the South Carolina code because it says shall, and we're out of alignment with the other RBCs. And in the PD one, I think we need to have this as well. They actually put a thing in there about transparency. They say that their representatives on the RBC are currently serve as directors at large of the South Carolina section of the Water Reuse Association. I think we aren't transparent. We don't say that, even though we're pushing this to 69 times we mention it compared to everyone else who's mentioning it once, twice, 4 times. What you displayed for us doesn't solve my problem. That's all I gotta say.
So
Hey, Bill, this is Kirk. I appreciate that comment. I just want to make clear that the terminology difference in this definition here, and I think even in the way you read the code, refers to where the water is in the cycle, and that's all. Right? If you take a soda bottle and you put it out on the curb for pickup, that's not recycled yet. You're putting it in for recycling, but it hasn't been recycled. It gets taken away, reclaimed, prepared, and once it's used again, once you drink it the second time, now it's been recycled. And I think that's what this diagram is showing, and I think that's what the state code says too. That water that is taken out of the waste cycle, reclaimed, it's prepared for any kind of recycled use, but it hasn't been recycled yet. It's been reclaimed. And that's what these lines, these purple lines are. And I think that's what the state code says, that water that's been treated at the plant to drinking standards, as it's piped to the different uses, it hasn't been recycled yet. It's prepared for recycling. It's been reclaimed. It's on its way. It'll be in a purple pipe. And then once it's used for irrigation, once it's used for industrial use, whatever the use may be, that is the instance of recycling. That is the act of recycling the water or the reclaimed water. So the terminology really, as Grace has shown it here, only determines where it is in the cycle. And I think that's how I read the code too.
But what I agree with you, Kirk, and that makes sense to me. However, we changed everywhere in our plan that says reclaimed water, we changed to recycled 100%. We eliminated every other term other than recycled and called it recycled 69 times. Do you agree with that, Kirk?
So I have a question, Bill, for you.
Well, I asked Kirk a question.
Oh,
Ken.
okay.
Can Kirk
Yeah,
answer?
I can answer that. I think most of the times in the plan that I read it, I think you're probably right, Bill, that there are places where we might want to clarify these definitions based on that diagram. But I think the intent of the RBC is to put the water to use, at which point it becomes recycled water. That's the action that the RBC is recommending. It's not so much.
And I agreed with that. I agree with that, and I agree with that in the general sense.
Yeah.
But we wholeheartedly changed the language. We eliminated reclaimed water altogether. We eliminated reclaimed wastewater, and I don't like that. That's because I think the other ones did it better. They called it reclaimed water programs for water reuse and recycling. That's what they called it, which is more accurate. We call it recycled water.
Yeah, and I think that's what Grace is proposing here. Is can we go through the plan and make sure that we're calling it the right thing based on where it is in the cycle in each instance? Grace, is that a fair?
Yeah, that's a
69
suggestion.
times,
So
that's a
just
lot.
to provide one example, like if we look at the language currently here of use, utility provided recycled water for irrigation or other uses, a way that we could change that to be consistent with these definitions could be a recycled water program using utility provided reclaimed water for irrigation and other uses. And then we could go through each of these instances that you've found where it's recycled water now and see, okay, is it really recycled water that we're talking about here? Or is it more the source of water? Is it the reclaimed water itself? So where we talk about recycled water programs generally, I probably keeping that as a recycled water program makes sense. But where we're talking about the source of that water, that could be changed to reclaimed water.
I guess I have a question for Bill. I mean, you seem very emotional about this particular issue. I mean, it's like a do or die for you. What's behind that? Is it a concern of safety or what? I mean, what is it, Bill? Could you share with us?
No, it's about, yes, I will. It's straight language. And so you said, Ken, yourself, and it's in the meeting minutes, that you were changing the term to make it more palatable by the public. And I don't like being misled by language. I want to talk straight. And I think in the 17 meetings you've been with me, I think you've seen that. I want to talk straight. And I think when I read the other RBC plans, they are much more straight than we are. We are misleading by wholeheartedly changing the language. I don't like that. And it's not about safety. I was okay with doing the studies and doing all of that, but not change the language. The language is misleading because you said yourself, go pull it out of the meeting minutes, says it's to make it more palatable. That's wrong. It is what it is.
Okay, since it's a comment on me, let me respond to that to the group. I dealt with this issue in the late 80s in California as a young politician and on a water wastewater board. The Water Reuse Association was starting and the term used by the engineers at that time in the 80s was treated effluent wastewater. I mean, whatever. So at the same time, the country was in a big recycling push, which still continues today. And they didn't call the Coke cans you drank out of, reused trash. They called them recycled cans, right? For various reasons. So we enacted in the early 90s, the Water Recycling Act in 1992, I think it was, that set goals, defined terms. In South Carolina, so y'all know, the Water Reuse Association has a draft statute right now that's going to go to legislature hopefully this year to change these terms. I mean, the state water plan hasn't been updated in 20 years. We're trying to help South Carolina come into the modern times. I mean, the Department of Energy bill defines recycled water. They use the term recycled water. for all the things that the Department of Energy does with water. That's what they choose to call it. Florida is in the middle of billions of dollars of doing this stuff. So we're just trying to, we're trying to help South Carolina come into the current century on this issue. If you all want to call it reclaim wastewater, effluent, whatever, do it. It's your choice. It's your choice. I think we could help the state water plan. I know Charleston's trying to go directly to portable reuse and potable reuse in their planning process. It's up to the RBC. I mean, you can hear both sides. I suggested at the beginning the easiest way to do it is to define it up front. You could put the diagrams in, do whatever you want to do it, but go back and surgically change every word about reclaim to this and treated. I mean, it would be, that could take weeks. But if y'all want to do it, do it. I've spoken my piece. I think the RBC generally has voted and discussed it. But yet here we are again.
And
Yeah.
if I may, Bill, what I'm hearing is your main concern is the lack of transparency and a concern with coming at this from more of a marketing perspective. So if we make the change where we try to make this as transparent as possible, what we're talking about here, we define it up front, maybe we even include a graphic, and then we make the distinction of recycled water programs using reclaimed water as the source. Could this be a workable solution that everyone could live with?
I can live with that. That would be in alignment with the other RBC.
Mm-hmm. And Ken, from your response, it seemed like maybe you could live with that as well.
Yeah, we're trying to create attention to the issue. Absolutely. I think that would be actually better than what's in the plan now.
Grace, I would offer that it's not out of line with the other RBCs. It's setting a new standard for the RBCs. Maybe the other RBCs are doing what we kind of do in a profession and use these terms interchangeably too casually. I think this discussion is actually very pointed and can help the state water plan if we set a new standard for this. I don't see it out of alignment at all.
No, and if I may, I don't believe anywhere that our work here was to be in alignment with other RBCs or even be in alignment with state code. It was to come together as a group of stakeholders, learn about what's going on in our neck of the woods in South Carolina, and talk about what are some of the best things that we can have the state consider for our neck of the woods. And all due respect to the rest of South Carolina, but like we learned as we met as a council, our part of the state has had to be much more progressive, much more dynamic and innovative when it comes to water resources because of what we face here in our coastal areas. And the coast is a part of this river basin. And we've been doing recycled water a long time. So I understand Bill's point. I'm a former newspaper reporter. I'm all about accuracy and I'm all about that words matter. I had an old editor tell me that once. Pete, words matter, and they do. Bill is right about that. So if we want to go down through each 69 reference and make sure that, it's referring to recycled versus reclaimed accurately, I don't mind going through that process. But I think as Grace is suggesting, as Kirk's pointing out, we can get there a lot quicker by doing some definition up front and away we go. And we're giving good information that way to people, which is the point of the plan ultimately.
Well, I think the plan, we had different words, and if you read the comment log, you guys said change them all to recycling. And so you sort of undid the thing that was natural, I think. And so that's what I'm fighting, that sweeping change to recycling back to something that we can actually understand as a language. And so Hilton Head's not the only coastal part that's having to deal with water. If you look at the history in South Carolina, I know, Ken, you kind of said you're trying to pull us into the 21st century. That I think that's offensive, but I think that if you look at the Santee Cooper system, they were trying to 200 years ago, they were trying to figure water out when they diverted the Santee to the Cooper. So South Carolina's been dealing with it a long time.
Bill, you may find it offensive, but it's if you look at South Carolina, where they are in water reuse versus the surrounding states and the rest of the country, it is archaic. I mean, the water plan hasn't been updated. And we're trying to be,
You can
we're
say
trying to be, I'm not done, Bill. We're trying to be progressive here.
Still,
We're trying to be,
All right, well, I think we have used our 15 minutes and it sounded to me like we had a path forward. So I am going to step in and make sure Grace is clear on, I guess, on how this will be addressed in the plan.
Yeah.
Do you feel like okay.
Yeah, let's just quickly go through it and make it clear, because next we're going to ask everybody to vote on this. So I want to make sure everybody knows what they're voting for. So I think that the place that adding this definition and a little bit more discussion makes most sense is when we're talking about the water management strategies. That's where we provide definitions of what all of the other strategies are. I think it'll fit well in the plan to provide this definition here. There are a couple instances prior to that where we talk about recycled water programs currently in use in the basin. So I think we could leave those as recycled water programs. Maybe we could add the also known as use of reclaimed water or water reuse in the first instance of it to make it clear. And then, those are the main instances. So just the rewording of the strategies to be recycled water programs using utility provided reclaimed water.
just a suggestion, since in my opinion, most people are only going to read the executive summary. It needs to be updated there too, Grace, as I commented before.
Yeah. Okay.
And where do you think it would be appropriate to go into an expanded definition?
Yeah, let's quickly pull up the executive summary. So where we talk about the water management strategies here.
It was at the first use. I just searched for the terms.
Okay, so right now, this is under the what to know about this plan. So this is the highest level summary as part of the executive summary. So under supply side management, this is the first time it comes up as the use of recycled water, also known as water reclamation or water reuse. So maybe we keep it simple there, since this is a summary of the summary.
You could also do a pointer to a chapter and where there's a big discussion about it.
Where the definition
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So add reference to expanded discussion in chapter 6. And then pardon the scrolling. Water availability summary. And then in the water management strategies evaluated. It comes up here in reference to the groundwater barrier via injection of, that probably makes sense to be reclaimed water.
Well, once you inject it, it's recycled.
Yeah.
Just like once you put it in the green, whatever Pete's green deal is, you've recycled it. You're putting it into the pond, it's going down to the aquifer, it's being recycled.
Yeah, it's like that bullet is a great example of what we're talking about if you're really going through and differentiating that purpose of it versus what your source was. So it's like that bullet would say creation of a recycled water based groundwater barrier via injection of reclaimed water.
Yeah, because it is the source is reclaimed water.
Right.
The program, the use of it is to recycle it. Yeah. But
it's going to get a little wordy, but
Yeah.
if our point here is to make it clear what we're talking about,
let's be very concise in the executive summary in our definition. And as it
Hmm.
appears in the text, let's not worry about being too wordy. Let's just be very clear. And in the executive summary, we can offer the very concise definition.
I agree with that.
So then, yeah, where it shows up here, this will just be the revised text of the practices themselves. And then I think it just shows up in the recommendations as the language voted upon. Okay, so after this meeting, we'll go through and make all these changes, and we can send it back out to the group. Let us know if you have any commentary. Does that sound like a plan?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
And Grace, let me
Great.
clarify, when I said not worry about getting worried, I didn't mean not worry about it. As Pete said, words matter, right? But let's be really aim to be concise and clear in the executive summary, and then use whatever words we need to, and whatever, however long the sentence needs to be in the action.
Mhm. Yep, that sounds like a plan.
Can we add
Okay.
one other thing, Grace, as well? The that disclaimer that's in the PD plan, where they talk about members that are on the council that are part of reuse, water reuse at South Carolina. They basically say, yeah, we want this to be done, but we are saying that we're part of water reuse South Carolina. They kind of put a disclaimer in there. I'd like that disclaimer in ours as well.
And what's the disclaimer on? Or where does it
says
show
if-
up in the
if
PD
South
plan?
Carolina- I'll email it to you, but it says the South Carolina section of water reuse was established in December 2021 to advance water recycling programs and regulation in the state. Several water utility representatives from the PD River Basin currently serve as directors at large in the South Carolina section. And so I think we have the same thing. We're part of the RBC. We're the only non-governmental agency we're referencing is water reuse. I think we ought to say if we have a connection to them separately.
Mike, then we have to reference ag. We have representatives of ag that are, that have their permits that may exceed allocations. There's all kinds of different interest groups on the RBC that have different conflicts. We have business development people. We have all kinds of people with their own interests.
Oh.
So then we got to
when
reference
we're
all
calling
those
out
too.
the
We got to reference all those too, to be fair. I mean, we do.
We aren't members of something like Water Reuse SC. We're not members of it per se individually. Our utilities are members of it, the entire utility organization. So you'd be going down through and saying Hilton Public Service District, Beaver Jasper Water and Sewer Authority, South Island Public Service District. The actual organizations are the members.
I think they thought it was important enough in the PD to put it in their plan. I thought it was appropriate.
We're not PD. I oppose that unless we do the disclaimers on all the groups and their interests and whatever they have an interest in, then we do a general disclaimer about all interest groups.
Yeah, I thought, don't we reference like AWWA and stuff in the plan at some points? And I think there's some other associations.
What was that, Pete?
I think we referenced like the American Waterworks Association at some point in the plan, and
Probably.
it wouldn't shock me.
I think we refer to maybe the leak detection
Mhm.
manual from AWWA. Can't remember other instances of it coming up, but
It's in the PD.
Same
and I
thing.
thought
You,
it
you
was
know,
good.
Hilton PSD is a member of the AWWA. Beaver Jasper is a member. Yeah, whatever.
Hmm.
I don't mind having my membership in anything listed in the plan. It doesn't matter to me. I'm just about if we're being accurate or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm trying to think through what other instances, if we do it here, where we would want to add it for other use categories too.
Well,
And
we have people the permitting process in the state is archaic. Don't mean insult anybody, but there's not a lot of science behind it. And there's people want to keep their current permits, even though they're using 10% of it. I mean, that doesn't make sense. We're not attacking that. But there are interest categories on the RBC that have those protections in place, and we ought to say that too if we want to list out all the stuff going on.
The
Grace,
state regulators are members of Water Reuse SC. Administrators of SCDES are
I just
at the
think
table.
it makes no sense unless we list them all out. I understand you have this one particular issue, Bill, but there's other issues that are equally or more important, frankly. Permitting process is a hell of a lot more important than this issue for sure.
okay, so
And
just
yeah.
wrapping up. Go ahead, Grace.
I just say it's in the PD, and I thought it looked good.
Okay, yeah, so Bill made this recommendation. Seems like there's some pushback on it from other members of the group. Just thinking through where the concern was originally, like the marketing of this, like if we're going through and making the change to just explicitly use these definitions, distinguish between recycled and reclaimed, do you still see this as a conflict that we really need a disclaimer on, or have we kind of resolved the slant on it that was concerning by adding more of the definitions?
Yeah, I think we're expanding upon it. We're making it clear and transparent, what we're defining and how we're using it. And it doesn't come across as a slant. So maybe the PD, I don't know. I mean, maybe that was how they handled some of the internal conflict they had. But I think we had a good discussion. We came to a consensus for moving forward. And I would propose that, I mean, Grace, if you still want to look back at the PD and see if, that might be a final edit, but for the purpose of the draft test, I think we stick with the discussion we had and the path forward in that regard.
Okay. So sounds like we will move forward with the changes that we've proposed of expanding the definitions, being consistent with where we're using what, but for now, not including any additional disclaimer on the members of the RBC working for entities that are also members of these other associations. I will look at the PD plan and follow up with you, Bill, too, just to clarify, but the plan that we'll be voting on next won't have that disclaimer in it.
Thank you.
Hey, Grace, we
Yes.
do have quorum, so we want to go back and approve the agenda and minutes and summary.
Yeah,
before
let's
we
do
vote.
that.
And I'll just say there were a couple of small, just spelling errors in the minutes, so nothing of substance, but thank you for the edits.
Okay, so we
Okay.
called this meeting to order, but because we were short on a quorum, we didn't approve the agenda or the minutes. So at this time, do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Motion by Ken, second?
Second.
I'll take second.
I think Reed got in there. All right. All in favor?
Aye.
How about we just say, I'll call for any objections. Okay. Likewise with the minutes, do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Ken, second?
Second.
All right, Pete, any objections? All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, all right, thank you all for that discussion. Glad we were able to come to a workable agreement. So after this call,
Grace, can we do one thing before we move on to the test of consensus?
sure.
There's one other. Could we bring up the executive summary?
The 2-pager?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, we are planning to go through that next.
Before the consensus or after the
No. Well, the 2-pager isn't, I guess it's formally not part of the plan. Like the framework just talks about the plan and the executive summary and then some RBCs.
If you could just bring it up, I want to bring something up to the RBC. That hit me when. All right, so if you go down to that can you go down to the bottom of the page and bring up that diagram? Explode it, please. So that should answer our questions, right? Is there enough water in the basin through 2070? We're just missing 2 lines. we have the permitted and registered amount, which I think is interesting, but we don't have the supplied amount. And my suggestion is that if we put the supply amount at the normal and drought on that chart, then that chart will encapsulate pretty much all the answers to all the questions for the district. I mean, for the basin. You following me? So I don't know where the lines would be, but I assume they're around or below the permitted amount. But it would then answer question 1, question 2, whatever. Because right now you look at that and that doesn't tell me if we have enough water in the basin.
I hear your point. I'm just trying to think through what that number of supply would actually represent. We're showing both surface water and groundwater demands. And I mean, as we all know, the availability varies both with time and hydrologic conditions as well as space. So like where the withdrawers are versus where they're
I
pulling
know, but we're
from.
doing this is a basin plan, Grace, so we got to have an answer to the question. So whatever we put in later in the plan to answer those questions, there should be lines that we can put. There's an expected amount we have from surface and groundwater per year, right? In normal conditions, and there's an amount we have in drought conditions. And this doesn't show
Yeah.
drought,
So
drought or
the way
anything.
that we answered it was just a little bit of a more detailed look, where instead of just pulling one number, we looked at the full hydrologic record using the surface water availability model. And then we tried to answer that question with the key findings of that modeling effort.
But isn't it data? I mean, isn't there a number we can put on that chart that we know what that number is? Given that we don't know the groundwater, we have models that say, hey, this is how much water we have. Because that's what the whole reason for the plan was. And the fact that we don't have a conclusion of whether there's enough water is, by numbers, right? I'm an engineer. It's a number.
But it might not be totally accurate to just give a single number. It's because it's
Well, if you look, that's a chart that would be a number per year. So either the supply is going to stay the same, it's going to go down, but you see growth going up ever so slightly. But it would also give a clear indication of whether the supply is even enough to meet the registered and permitted users amount, which would be an interesting, I think in some cases it's not, which then the state could go, wow, maybe we need to relook at that whole process.
Ken, I think that is a great question, and I deal with this a lot. I think if we were looking at a single supply system, absolutely, it's the firm yield or the safe yield of that supply, whether it's a river withdrawal or aquifer withdrawal or reservoir, whatever the case may be. There's a number for that. But when we look at all of the combined systems as a whole, it does change in time. It changes based on drought conditions and so forth. And I think the answer to the question is in Chapter 5, the water availability study. And it's where we see the frequency and intensity of shortages. And where we stop seeing those, that could be equated with, the supply. But I don't know if we call that out ever explicitly. We test the current use patterns. We test the, future 2070 demand patterns. And if there are shortages, then there's not a firm supply there. It's really kind of the first total demand that doesn't create a shortage, but that demand could be distributed in space and create shortages elsewhere. So it's very difficult to come up with a single number.
No, I'm not talking about, I'm talking about two numbers, because we have a demand curve, right?
Mm-hmm.
We came up with that demand curve somehow, even though there's all kinds of flux going on with that demand curve, but we don't have a supply curve. And we could have a supply curve at normal and then a supply curve at extreme drought, just to show that those lines don't intersect or don't even come close to each other.
Right. I guess what I'm saying is that if Grace and I were two different users and I used 50 million gallons and Grace used 10 a day, based on our different locations, there may be enough water. But if we switch that and Grace used 50 and I used 10, she might have a shortage because maybe she's upstream. So that number of 60, the combined number, it's artificial. It's not real.
But we're doing a river basin plan.
Right.
not an individual household plan. And
Right.
this is the data from the River Basin plan. But so you've got permitted users and you've got anticipated demand, but you have no supply. I mean, it just, as an engineer, it makes zero sense to me that we're doing all this 2 years worth of study and we don't know. I understand the groundwater model, but we understand the surface water model. So we know what in the basin the surface water model number is, right? Per year. We know
And we have those graphs for surface water, but that graph right there combines groundwater and surface water, and we don't have defined numbers for our groundwater because we don't have that model. We looked at historical data and drawdowns and
but
charts,
there are numbers we interpreted numbers in the plan to come up with groundwater numbers. Even though we don't have the model, we still did that, right? It's in there. We have groundwater numbers. I'll work on the math for you guys, but it just seems to me to be a big miss.
Can I make a suggestion here,
Yeah.
Ken? I think this might require some discussion and maybe some interacting with chapter 5. Would it be okay to include this in the discussion of the executive summary and this 2-page sheet? I think it's a deeper discussion than a few minutes.
I just wanted to point it out because when I read the 2-pager, I look at that chart and I just go, man, it makes no sense to me.
It's a great point, and I think we can get into a good discussion on it, but
Sounds
I don't
good.
want to hold up. Can we come back to that in a little while? Okay.
Yep.
Okay. I keep switching on me.
And so that
Okay.
2-page summary, Grace, you were just alluding to this, it's technically not bound and included in this plan. That is something that's sort of like put out there maybe on our website or in different places with that QR code where someone can go get the full plan, right?
Yeah, I think DES typically posts it all together. It's been an additional document that other RBCs have thought would be helpful to develop, that wasn't initially called for as part of the planning framework. Okay, so we'll make changes to the plan based on our discussion about terminology. Hopefully get a full draft posted maybe early next week. And then after 30 days, we'll be able to have a public meeting, get public feedback, incorporate comments, then talk to the RBC about those changes and have our final plan that would then get voted on and released. So there's 2 steps to this process of approval of the plan. So the first step is testing for consensus on the draft plan. So then the results of this consensus get included as part of the draft that's released to the public. Then in step 2, each RBC member gets to decide rather than a level of endorsement, whether they support the plan and are willing to be part of the implementation of the plan or they disagree with it. So what we're doing today is step 1, which is the test for consensus on the draft plan. So each RBC member gets to rate their level of endorsement for the plan on a scale of 1 to 5. So a 1 would say that you fully endorse the plan and what it represents. A 2 is you still endorse the plan, but with minor points of contention. So maybe there were some recommendations that you wanted that didn't get full consensus and didn't make it into the plan, or you have some other small issues, but overall you're happy with it. 3 would be you're still endorsing the plan, but you have some major points of contention, more significant, but still where you would get behind the plan, be part of supporting it and implementing it. 4 or 5, or you have major issues and you stand aside, there's changes that just can't be made. Or 5, you fully withdraw from the process. So just for reference, the Upper Savannah just went through this and they completed step 1 for testing consensus of the draft plan. And that resulted in 13 votes of a 1 for full endorsement and 6 votes for a level 2 endorsement with minor points of contention. So not peer pressure or anything, but just to give that perspective of where things are with the Upper Savannah. Okay, so far we have heard from 2 members that sent their endorsements via email. Now we'll just go through alphabetically for anybody that is online and request your level of endorsement. If you want to make a short comment, you're welcome to. And then anybody that is not online today will follow up via email or phone call to make sure that we get everybody's endorsement. Are there any questions on that before we start? Okay. So starting at the top, is Danny Black online?
He is not, and Kathy is not either.
Okay. All right. How about Taylor Brewer?
Taylor's here.
Taylor, how would you like to vote?
She may be away from her keyboard.
Okay. Taylor, you're on mute if you're there. If not, we'll circle back to you. Okay.
Sorry,
Ken.
I apologize. I couldn't
Oh,
get back
okay.
to my audio. I vote yes, thank you.
Is that one?
Approve.
Okay.
Yes, full endorsement. I apologize.
Okay, thanks, Taylor. Okay, Ken.
2 right now.
Is John Carmen online?
He may be online. I see an 803 number. John, if that's you, *6. Not me.
Okay, we'll skip John for now. John, if you're there, speak up and we can come back to you. Brian.
Vote 1 for full endorsement.
Thank you. Austin or
Angel's
Angel?
here.
Well, could I defer and speak with Austin?
I'm sorry, what was that last piece?
Could I defer and speak with Austin before?
Yes, yep.
Okay.
Hey,
Yeah, we'll follow up with you.
hey, Grace and Tom.
Yeah.
Is Angel's the alternate in this case? Is that correct, Angel?
Right.
Yeah, I think the vote, according to the bylaws, has to come from the primary.
Okay. Yes.
member.
Speak with
Anyway,
Okay.
so
We'll follow up with an email to you, Angel, and Austin, and look for a response from Austin.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, Leslie?
Support out of 1.
Thank you. Carrie?
1.
Thank you. Sam? Sam online?
Yeah, he's not.
Okay, come back to that. Is Jeff online?
Yeah, fully endorse.
Okay, thank you. Courtney?
I'm a 1, but I will echo some of Ken's concerns about just having some reflection of supply. If the whole idea is to have a projection of demand and supply that meets demand, I think there needs to be something reflected in that.
Okay, we'll come back to that conversation. Thank you. Dean?
I don't think he's on.
Okay. Pete?
2. And just same with Courtney and Ken, some of the concerns about how we're discussing capacity relative to demand, and a little bit on just making sure on the recycling terminology, recycling reclaim terminology.
Okay. Sarah? Sarah online?
No.
Okay. Brad, I think I saw Brad.
That's
Oh
Brad
no,
Young.
maybe I saw Brad Young. Okay. No Brad O'Neill. Joseph, Joe?
He did log in. He's here.
Joe, are you available to unmute and provide your level of endorsement?
You can type it in the chat.
Okay, we can come back to that. Tommy, is Tommy online?
Mhm.
That would be a 1 for me.
Okay, thank you. Reed,
Level 1 full. I think some good comments this morning. Kirk, Pete, again, everyone. I think one of them was the main thing is that we want to make sure we can make a point to the public and bring awareness to the issue. And I think our plan does that. So I'm a 1.
okay, thank you. Is Brandon online?
He's not here currently.
Okay. All right, Bill.
I'm a 2, but it depends on how your edits go. It could drop to a 4, but I'll say 2 based on the promises.
Okay, thank you. Will Williams.
Not here.
Okay, and Brad Young.
I'm a 2 as well.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Thank you for getting through that, everyone. So the next item was our 2-page summary. So let's go back to that. So at least some of you have had a chance to review this. If you haven't, please do. This is, if nobody reads anything else, they might read this 2-page summary. So this could be something that you have in hand if any member of the RBC goes to talk to a member of the legislature or some other group within your community. And it aims to highlight really the key findings and the most important highlights of this entire plan. So with 2 pages, we really have to make some decisions about what those highlights are. But like at the most recent Saluda public meeting, one of the questions we got was, what are the key takeaways I should know about this plan? So this is the RBC's opportunity to answer that question. So we've taken a stab at going through based on this process and all the discussions over 2 years and the plan itself, what we think the main points that the RBC was trying to make are. On the first page, we just include a very brief background of the planning process, discussion of the current water use, how that compares to the permitted and registered amount, and then a discussion of the 2 demand projections for 50 years to 2070. We graphically show those demand projections compared to the permitted and registered amount. And then we talk about the key findings from the surface water quantity model, which is how we assess whether there are sufficient supplies in order to meet those demands. So looking at based on a full, forget exactly how long it is, 90-something years of historic records of historic flows throughout the basin, are those resources available to meet the current levels of demands, the projected 2070 demands, and if every user were to pull out their full permitted and registered amount, would there be enough water? And the findings were that for the current demands, there's generally a really low risk of shortages. I think looking at the whole historic record, there might have been some small shortages for ag users during really low periods, but then there were offline small impoundments that those users might be able to pull from during those times that could potentially alleviate those small shortages that weren't included in the modeling effort. So the answer was that there's a low risk of shortages. There's generally enough water to meet current demands. It showed something similar for 2070 demands. There, again, was a really low probability of shortages for all of the different users we looked at over the full hydrologic record. But then when we looked at the full permitted and registered scenario, if everybody were to pull their full permitted registered amount up here at 1600 MGD, there would be shortages. So generally there is not enough water in the basin to fully meet those permitted and registered amounts. And then we talk about how groundwater conditions were evaluated based on the data available. and there haven't been long-term declines. Talk about how the greatest concern is in the upper Florida aquifer with the Kona Depression around Georgia, and saltwater intrusion near Hilton Head. So based on some of the comments and changes that we made to the executive summary about the groundwater modeling, maybe that is a change that the RBC would want to just talk about the limitations of the analysis, particularly for looking at future conditions without having a calibrated groundwater model. And then the rest of this is the recommendations. So the RBC came up with a ton of recommendations that there was a lot of discussion around. But in 2 pages, we can't include all of those. So we tried to pull out what we thought might be most important to the RBC. Talk about the use of existing supply strategies because there really weren't a lot of projected shortages. Talk about demand side strategies, and then adaptive management. The technical recommendations that we pulled out of all of the recommendations were to work on the development of a groundwater model and understand the capacity of the aquifers and their ability to sustain future demands. Talked about the need to coordinate with Georgia on use and shared groundwater resources, and completion of the Army Corps comprehensive study and drought plan update. The policy recs we pulled out were for reasonable use criteria to be applied to all surface water withdrawals. Current water laws that allow for regulation of water use should be improved so they're enforceable and effective. And then the recommendation about the governors coordinating state planning at a governor level. And then the process recommendations were continued funding of state water planning activities and supporting general public awareness around watershed-based planning. And we just note that there is an implementation plan associated with this, with objectives and actions over the next 5 years. And then the QR code will go up here that will bring anybody back to where they can find the full plan and the executive summary. So this is the executive summary of the executive summary. If you haven't reviewed it, please do send us feedback. We want to hear it. But now, while we're here, let's welcome any comments and suggestions.
Yeah, this is Ken. So on the first page, I don't want to be a broken record, but on the first page, on the second column, we go through a detailed analysis of current water withdrawals, right? But when we go to the top of the second page, without any data, we say there's findings. So let's present some data. Let's present the same data we did above. I mean, otherwise, to me, the permitted amount is irrelevant. There was no science done when the permits were issued. The permit, somebody applied for a permit, they got the permit, they only used 10% of the water, the permit was never revised. So, I mean, to say we think we have enough to meet permitted use, but that's telling me, the word's telling me that the supply curve is actually somewhere below the permitted number. Has to be for the basin plan. So it just is too subjective to me on the key findings. I think we know that. I think sitting for 2 years, we know there's really not a water problem in the basin except for some issues, and it would be at the end of streams or whatever when there's a drought and stream flows, and then these people would be affected. We understand that, but there's really no empirical data in the basin plan of supply. There is on demand, but there isn't on supply.
Can I agree with you? I always would like to be able to identify a number there. Well, as you guys were voting, I went back and looked through chapter 5, and here's where it gets difficult to assign a number and maybe misleading, but I'd like to talk about how we could. When we look at the analysis that was done, we determined that there's enough water in the basin right now to satisfy current demand, right? So that's a line right there. We know that there's enough water in the basin to satisfy the moderate growth projections through 2070. That's enough. That's a line right there. There are no shortages that couldn't be managed. But when we get to the high demand projection for 2070, there is a shortage. There's a projected shortage at Graniteville. And you can make two arguments there. You could say that, okay, we've now hit the upper limit of our supply for the basin at that level, but it doesn't capture the fact that a lot of other users could actually still take a lot more water, increase the total yield from the basin, but it wouldn't alleviate Graniteville's shortage. And that's where it gets sticky. And I think that's why the planning framework focused more on the reliability of supply at different levels and not trying to identify a single yield value or reliable supply from the basin as a whole. Each individual system, and we've done this a lot in other basins where there have been reservoirs and individual storage systems. We've identified the safe yield of those systems. That's a number, but we haven't done that for basins for those reasons. The plan and the planning framework focus on the shortages, the reliability is another word for it at different levels. And maybe there's a way we can summarize that here. But I fear that putting a line across that graph that shows that the only reliable supplies for up to the moderate 2070 demand level could be misleading, because there is a lot more water in the basin at other locations other than where there might be a shortage. Scott, I don't know if you have any context from the framework itself or some of the thinking behind that, but my understanding has always been that we quantify the available water through the assessment of shortages. And maybe we can put some of that language in here, or a graph of some sort there before we get to the findings. Because Ken, you're absolutely right. We talk about the demand, we don't talk about shortages, we don't talk about supply. And maybe that there's a place for that. I would just caution against putting a line on that graph. Those are my thoughts and guidance. Scott, I don't know if you have some thoughts on
Yeah,
that.
I'll weigh in. I agree with much of what you said, Kirk. It's very difficult to meaningfully put a single supply curve on that graph in the summary, because it's going to vary by where you are in the basin, and plus, you're combining the lower Savannah and Salkehatchie, right? And those are two different two different watersheds, right? So that also complicates it. The framework, was really, intended to focus on shortages at specific user intakes, and then also defining water supply at those intakes. It wasn't really intended to come up with a single water supply number for the basin as a whole. Though I get why that would be, people might be interested in that. I get that, but that's not really how we set up the water availability analysis. That wasn't necessarily the goal. It was really to look at all uses and where they're at. Do they have enough water? What's their water supply? And so I don't know how you can show a water supply curve or numbers on that plot like you do the water demand. I'm trying to think of ways we can kind of get to what their concern is, but I'm struggling to get there. So I'm still thinking about it.
I agree with you completely that it would be great to include some way to address that and then talk about like
the number one question: what is the basin's current available? And Scott, I'm an engineer. You say this is the question, give me the answer, show me. Everybody on this call, pretty much, I know all the staff are engineers, but number one question: what's the basin's current available supply and demand question mark? There was no subsets. What are the current, and number two, what are the current and permitted and registered water users within the basin? Question mark. That's there, right? And you have the demand part, but you don't have the supply in number one. And what will be the demand in the basin throughout the planning horizon, which is 2070. So you have everything except for available supply. And I mean, you can caveat the crap out of it by saying we're answering the question, but there's all these little tributaries and whatever, and it doesn't mean there'll be water available under every scenario, because it's a very complicated structure and the permits and boom, 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 boom. But we're not answering number one question. And maybe that wasn't really the question. Maybe that question should have been rephrased, but it is the question in our plan. And you know, that's what I'm going, that's what I'm looking at.
Yeah, that question probably, we need to think about rephrasing that. It's probably too general. We said basin, because it sounds like you are talking about the basin as a whole. I see your point there. Again, but the problem is you can, you're going to talk about surface water supply in the basin as a whole. You're really talking about the outlet of the basin, however you define the outlet of the basin, whether that's the coast or where the saltwater or freshwater interface is. I don't know how you would define that. So you can define a surface water supply there, potentially, but it's meaningless though. Is the problem, because it doesn't mean anything for any particular user in that basin except for someone at that particular location. That's my concern, is that you can show something, but it's not informative, and it can be very misleading, which I think is a lot of Kirk's comments made earlier kind of gets to that, right, Kirk?
Yeah, I'm thinking about it though as we're talking, and I'm thinking, when you look at that graph, Grace, maybe if you can scroll back up to the graph, please. Ken, I think your point is you look at that and you say, well, what's the problem, right? We've got plenty of water. Demand doesn't come close to that. If people interpret that permitted and registered as available supply, which they will, I'm seeing where you're coming from, Ken. They'll say, what's the problem? We don't need a water plant. The problem is there's no other horizontal line that holds true. But one thing to think about perhaps would be to add the line at the total moderate demand level, right, which is going to be down in the 300 something, and say this is a demand level basin wide that can be satisfied. We've done that through modeling and testing. Above that, and when we get to the 2070 high demand, we start running into shortages. I would do, if we do that, I would put it as maybe a dot on the far side of the graph rather than as a line all the way across it. Or a dash line, and then it would need some kind of footnote to say that doesn't mean that other users can't get more supply. This is not the safe yield of the basin, because I don't think we have that number. But we can say, and put this in context, that there is a level at which current use patterns would start to run into shortages at whatever it is, 375 MGD or whatever that moderate 2070 demand growth number is, or the high demand. We would have shortages under current use patterns. That would be reasonable. It would emphasize the fact that that's where the kind of available water is. I wouldn't call it the yield of the basin or the supply of the basin, but available to current users does have a number above which there would continue to be shortages. The tricky part is caveating it to say that, that maybe was one user, and the other users in the basin could increase their use by 20-30% above that number and still be okay. That's the trick. I think that either way we do it, it can be misleading, and we need to be careful about that. But can I see your point? And it would emphasize the sort of the need for the plan. If we had something in here that showed visually that, hey, this is where we start to run into problems. And we get to be careful what we call that, but this is where we start to see shortages, and that might be a good
And I think your comment, Kirk, about looking at that black line and thinking it's the amount, you're right.
Right.
That's what people are, but we know that's not the amount. We know there was no science in putting those permits. It was just, hey, you want something, here's a stamp, boom, over the years, right? So what you're telling me though is if there's a dot over there near the 400 or 375, there's no possibility of getting water to all those permitted and registered users then, right? We're way over permitted.
Right.
Which then we should say, there's an issue there, and the state ought to look at, as part of their water planning process, that black line.
Right. And I think there is a paragraph that talks about that down below, about the overallocation. But to your point, there's no visual cue that says this is where we start to run into problems. And maybe that's the middle ground that we could come up with, that not calling it the supply of the basin, because there is no single number for that, but to say, hey, at this level of demand, we start to see shortages in supply.
And maybe instead of under the words permitted and registered amount, maybe we should say not water supply or something, because that line looks like it's the water supply line.
Right.
the way the graph is registered.
People will interpret it that way for
Yeah,
sure.
they will. If you're getting a 2-page summary, you're going to look at that and say, "Oh my God," I'm going to look at that chart and say, "Next plan. What's the issue with this?" Right?
No, that's a really valid point. And, utilities and states and regions struggle with this all over the country because that line, when you draw that line out, it turns out to be a step function. It turns out to be a curve. It turns out to be, and that's just for an individual system. It's really tricky to do at the regional level like this. But I do think that it would be useful and informative to a reader if there was an X or a dot over on the right that said, hey, at this level, we start to run into shortages. It doesn't mean that there's not more water in the basin to use, but this is where we have to start paying attention. Somebody sees that little red dot and says, okay, now I want to read the plan and find out why.
And another question is why is the black line static? That anticipates no more permitted or registered users in the next 50 years.
Yeah,
I
it
think
should
it's
probably be the current permitted and registered amount.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Hey, Grace, also, this is surface and ground in this
It
plan?
is.
So your comments, Kirk, would really only,
Apply to
that
surface.
dot you want to put
Apply to
on there would only
surface,
apply
yeah.
to the surface water portion of that. So I don't know how you
Correct.
want to deal with that.
Yes,
Well,
that's another layer. Yeah.
It
Right.
just needs to be stated that that's where surface water shortages occur.
Mhm.
But your demands there have both. So if you only had surface
I
water,
know.
that would look different. So I don't know how y'all want to do, and you only have 2 pages, right? So I don't know how you want to.
Right.
I'm just saying there's going to be some
Yeah.
tweak. I mean,
And I
some,
agree. I mean, I see the point about needing a visual. You have a visual on the demand. Let's put a visual on the, where our supply is and where it starts to fall short. It's not going to be as simple as a line, but I have confidence in y'all coming up with a way to
Yeah.
visually show and like someone said, entice the reader to read more, right? That's what we want to do with this.
Right. Fortunately, there's plenty of white space on that graph where we can include some explanatory.
Yeah.
The other idea is you could put a band like from maybe 200 300 mgd wide to say this is the supply. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't have to be a number. It could be a band of numbers. It could be from 600 to 1,000. I mean, or I'm just throwing out whatever that could be, or it could be from 300 to 800, whatever it is, be combined surface and groundwater. And then at least you get an idea where the supply is. Doesn't have to be a number like this is because of all the different conditions, but it would at least give the reader an idea of what the potential availability is. And it'd also point out there are too many permitted and registered users, which is another whole issue because then people might think, well, they may think, I don't know. I don't know how they're going to interpret what a permitted registered amount is.
Yeah, I think the simpler we could keep this, the better. But Ken, would you be okay if Grace and I and John Scott put our heads together to figure out how to try to take a stab at this, and we can circulate that idea to the group and maybe have a discussion with you and Carrie before we send it out to the larger group. But it's as you correctly point out, it's a concept that can be so easily misconstrued, and I want to make sure we avoid any possibility of that. But I really like the point that right now it's as it's put, it's wide open to misconstruction.
This is Reed, and these are certainly good comments, but especially the one about encouraging the reader to read further into the plan. So I'm not a scientist, a biologist, or an engineer. So anything can be in there short that would be kind of an alert to the average reader to, hey, read some more of the plan. Would be good. And it would still keep it short and simple, or short and not necessarily simple.
Right.
Okay.
Great. Let's take that.
For the sake of time,
try to do that.
Yeah, I think we've got a lot of good comments on this discussion, so we'll make some edits and circle back with Ken and Carrie and send out revisions to the whole group. Before I move on, does anyone have any other big comments on this? that are worth discussion, or please take a look at this after the meeting ends and send any feedback, suggestions to me, John, Kirk. Okay. Again. Okay, so next we want to talk about the public meeting. So this is where the RBC will be presenting the River Basin Plan to the public. So once we make all of the changes and are able to get the plan posted, 30 days after, we can have a public meeting. That gets us, assuming we can post early next week, close to the 4th of July holiday, lots of summer vacations or travel plans. So we're right now targeting the week of July 14th. So we want to pick a day and a location to try to get this set up. So a lot of the other river basin committees have held their public meetings on Tuesdays or Thursdays. I understand that sometimes church groups have meetings on Wednesdays. So starting with Tuesday and Thursday of this week, would anyone have issues with Tuesday the 15th? And we understand that everybody is not going to be able to attend this public meeting, but we want to encourage as much RBC participation as we can. So Tuesday the 15th, how does that look for everyone?
I would not be able to attend on the Tuesday, but I would be
Okay.
on Thursday. Yeah, I'm a school board member and we meet on the third Tuesday evening.
Okay. All right. Well, Carrie, as our chair, let's scoot over to the 17th then.
Sorry.
I'm good.
No, that's fine.
I'm good Thursday as well, Ken.
Okay, great.
I'm out of town that whole week, so I'm out.
Okay.
I'm unavailable that whole week as well.
Okay.
I'm not available also, and I'm not sure if Jeff's still on the call. He may be unavailable. Farm.
Okay. I think from our planning meeting, if we got into the next week, Carrie or Ken were also unavailable. Is that right?
It's Ken leaves town. Is that right, Ken?
Okay.
I am let's see, leaving. I'm good on like Monday, Tuesday, Monday, Tuesday only.
Okay.
So we could potentially do Tuesday the 22nd.
Tuesday the 22nd. How does that sound? Those who weren't available on the 17th, would you be back on, what did we say? Tuesday the 22nd?
I think I could probably do that.
Okay, thanks, Brad.
And I can be there too. That's Bill.
Okay.
But
And those that aren't saying anything, does that mean you're good with either?
Good.
I'm good.
Okay. Scott and DES side, are there any issues with Tuesday the 22nd? Should probably look at, make sure there's no other RBC meetings that day.
Quick question. What time of the day would it be? Would it be afternoon or evening, early evening?
It's typically in the evening. I think all of the other ones have been 6 to 8 p.m.
That's right. And I'm available, Grace. I don't have anything
Okay.
scheduled that day.
I guess this would be in person somewhere. Is that okay?
Yes, yeah.
We
So
don't know where
our
yet.
next bullet here is settling on a location that the RBC thinks would make sense.
About Hampton.
I vote Hampton.
You want to do it at our state park?
You can have it at the Hilton at PST recycled water plant if you.
That's even better for me.
Yeah, I vote for that.
We do have a
Are you
community room
claiming
here
that
if you need it.
Are you claiming that or reclaiming that?
They'll be both. They'll be both.
We could do it. We could probably do it at Buford Jasper at on the 170, 278 right there. They have a room.
Yeah, I don't know about evenings there.
Oh, they have board meetings at night, so probably, but
Yeah,
you know the GM, but no, I'm just.
yeah, weird, they'd open it up.
Probably ought to keep it central like we've been doing, just.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Hampton's been great.
Okay, what was the location in Hampton?
Well, I mean, we've been doing it at the church, but we do have the Lake Warren State Park. It has a very nice community room. The only reason we didn't hold our regular meetings there is that Wi-Fi is not that great. So, but I don't think that's an issue for this public meeting. We're not putting out a public link, and being a state park, everyone should be able to, there's
Mhm.
I think
I can
we
look,
would need.
I can look
So-
into that,
Yes, I'm-
Grace.
Okay.
They have an
Like to go, I
online
like to-
calendar. You can reserve it online. Go see if it's available. So
Okay,
that
I'll
would be my
I'll check it
suggestion
out.
for a public meeting in here.
Okay. All right. So Scott will look into that, targeting Tuesday, the 22nd, would be 6 to 8 p.m. So Scott will let us know if there's any issue with that. Okay. So next. So this is the agenda for the public meeting, and this is the agenda that we have followed for the other river basins. Open to suggestions if the RBC wants to move things around or shake things up in any way. But how we typically start is with the RBC chair doing welcome and introductions. Scott or someone from DES would present an overview of the planning process from a state perspective, how the RBCs all fit in together and how they fit with the state water plan and some of the history behind that. Then we go into the highlights of the Draft River Basin Plan. And ideally, we have multiple RBC members coming up to present these different parts based on what you are comfortable with the content on. So someone would present on the vision and goals, and then the water demands and surface water availability assessment or the SWAM modeling assessment. Typically, John has done the water demands or the surface water availability, but if any RBC member is comfortable with that, that would be even better. No offense to John. Then we discuss stream flow ecology relationships. We can discuss for this RBC, the application of that was pretty limited. Right now we've included some draft slides on it, but maybe this isn't a strong enough topic to include discussion at a public meeting. Then someone would present on the water management strategies. Sometimes we have multiple people present on this, somebody to speak on the municipal side, somebody to speak on behalf of agriculture, and then a presentation of the plan recommendations and a discussion of implementation of the plan. And then Tom leads a question and answer session. So I'm going to just quickly preview the slides. We've only got about 20 minutes left in our meeting time, so we're not going to spend a lot of time on it, but just want to give everybody a sense of what the content is. So maybe we can then come back to this and figure out who our speakers could be for the different sections.
Quick question, Grace, while you're doing that. Is every public meeting had public show up?
Scott, has there been any meeting where no public has shown up? I know historically there's pretty limited attendance, with the exception being the Saluda meeting we had last week. The RBC was really gung-ho about getting the public to come to their meeting and did a lot of marketing of the event and even got some raffle prizes and food to have on it. And it worked out. They got a good amount of attendance, but that I think was the exception. So
What number is a good amount? How many attended that Saluda? Just curious.
Scott, did you get a final count?
It was close to 50, but that included some, RBC members and a few DES staff. But it was probably the best attended by far, the public meeting.
Has there been any instances where nobody's shown up?
No.
We've had a occasion where we've only had a couple.
Okay.
One or two at most,
Got it.
unfortunately.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. So these are the draft slides. Welcome to feedback as we're going through it. If you have any comments, stop me or feel free to send comments after this. So again, here's just the agenda. Carrie, we would ask to do the welcome and the introductions, would recognize all the RBC members that have participated. If anyone's present, you could stand up, get some recognition for all of your hard work. And then Scott, or potentially someone else from DES, would do an overview of the planning process, talk about the history of the plan, the 8 river basins, point out where we are, show our timeline, show how this plan fits into the overall timeline of Water SC and the State Water Plan, talk about PPAC, interest categories represented on this basin and on all the other river basins, the goals of the plan, and then just pointing out that the focus has been on water quantity and not water quality. Sometimes we get a lot of comments from the public that are more focused on water quality. So just letting everyone know off the bat that that's not the focus of this effort, but potentially future efforts. 4 phases, status of all the river basin plans and the state water plan, emphasizing the importance of stakeholder participation through all of this. And then we get back to this river basin plan and the highlights, which is where we would hopefully have an RBC member start. So somebody would just go over basically what we're going to present in the highlights, tell them what we're going to tell them, and then would share the vision statement that the RBC developed, as well as the 4 goals that the RBC came up with. Then pass it over either to John or someone else to discuss the current demands in the basin. We're showing it separately for the lower Savannah and the Salkehatchie here. So this is the lower Savannah, breakdown of surface water and groundwater, and then a breakdown by water use category. Same thing for the Salkehatchie. Then this was based on some feedback we got from the Broad River Basin Committee that it could be useful to provide some context of what this means if someone doesn't know what an MGD is, compare it to a Olympic swimming pool or flow out of your garden hose for the smaller use categories. Then present some key findings, which is here, the comparison of current use to the permanent registered amount on both the lower Savannah and Salkehatchie, and present the demand scenarios, projected water demand growth for both of the basins, and then get into how we did the surface water availability assessment, talk about how we used a model to do this, show the schematic of it, talk about how we used historic hydrology and withdrawals to assess the ability of the physical surface water supplies to meet different demand scenarios. And then for the Salkehatchie, just illustrate that it's mostly irrigation ag users that were simulated as part of the assessment. And here were some of the key findings that we pulled out, which closely mirror what was shown in that 2-page summary and in the executive summary. So based on some of the discussion we had today, we'll probably want to update this to include some more numbers or just more sensitivity to what we were showing before with the comparison to the permanent registered amount and acknowledgement of the physical supply available, but generally showing that there's a low risk of shortages currently and in the future. And then for that there's not necessarily enough water to meet the full permanent registered amount of all the users 100% of the time. We included a discussion of the extended drought scenario analysis that was done, just looking at how the different drought scenarios would impact the amount of releases from the upper Savannah to the lower Savannah. And then this was illustrating the release from Lake Thurmond. So just noting the impact on the flow entering the lower Savannah River. Then we would get into the stream flow ecology relationships, and the analysis of that, just noting that this was really only done at one location. In the lower Savannah, it did show a low risk and moderate risk depending on the different scenarios. Surface water management strategies. Again, this is where sometimes we have multiple RBC members come up to speak on municipal or agricultural strategies or even industrial here. And anyone can expand on this, talk about what they're doing at their specific location, just make these bullets a bit more relatable to the general public. And then again, we talk about the recommendations and we pulled out the ones that we thought might be most important to try to convey to the public. So this, I think, matches the key recommendations that we pulled out for the 2-page summary too. But if anyone has feedback on what the RBC thinks are the most important recommendations and want to see some edits to what we have pulled out here as a draft, please let us know. We talked about the first one here is the importance of the groundwater model. RBC has really wanted to emphasize that. The drought plan and then incorporating uncertainties. Planning process recommendations, outreach, continued funding, and then I think we didn't have this one in the 2-page summary, but the statewide meeting of RBCs and state agencies. Policy, legislative, and regulatory recommendations. I think these were the same ones that we had pulled out in the 2-page summary. And then just quickly highlighting on that there is an implementation plan as part of this plan. Talk about how there are actions to be taken within the next 5 years, as well as strategies to meet these 7 overarching objectives. And then someone to make a call to action to anybody present, what individual water users can do, what the RBC is hoping that other agencies or groups might do. And then show how comments can be submitted on the River Basin plan, sent to Scott. So we'll update this, we'll get a QR code, and note dates when these can all be received. Then pass it over to Scott for Q&A. So that is a quick overview of the content included in here. Any initial comments on that? I know based on our previous discussions, we'll probably want to update the discussion of the surface water availability assessment. So we'll make sure that we do that to be consistent with the approach that we take for the 2-page summary.
Yeah, that 14% allocation of permitted, I think, would be misleading unless we update that.
Yeah, yeah, definitely hear that.
All right, who wants to grab some spots?
So first is the vision and goals. That's really kind of laid out for someone, if anyone wants to volunteer for that.
Carrie ought to lead us in that.
I can jump back in and do that. Ken, I was thinking you also could do that if you'd like to, Vice Chair, but
I'll do it. I'll do it. Fine.
Okay.
Unless you want to do another.
No, that's good. That's a good section.
Okay. Does anyone feel strongly about taking over John's role on the demands or the surface water availability assessment? All right, we'll leave that for John. Stream flow ecology relationships.
Is it relevant since we only have one location out of 1 million in the basin?
Yeah, that's definitely a question that we would throw back to you as the RBC. Is that worthy of discussion? I mean, is part of the discussion just that this analysis was difficult to complete in this case, so the results are limited, or should we just strike this?
Do we have a recommendation of looking at that more in other locations in our plan?
I know some river basin councils did make that recommendation. I cannot remember off the top of my head if the Lower Savannah-Salkehatchie was one of those.
We did not, and I think part of it is it has to be wadeable, and most of our tributaries are not. So I think that's part of their constraint. I know that I think I showed Scott and John the book, The Fishes of the Middle Savannah River, that actually has done some of that for DOE, but I don't, because they're not wadeable, you can't. I don't think that's really easily doable.
Do you think we ought to talk about it, Bill?
I don't think so. I think it'll just confuse, because we'll say we have no data, and I think it opens up the questions. Then you'll have to explain why you can't.
Agree.
Okay.
I was going to defer to Bill to see if we did want to include it, if he wanted to speak about it. But if Bill, if you think it's not worth including, then I was going to defer to you.
I think it's a can of worms, and I can't fish with them, so that's what it is.
Yeah. Okay. Let's strike this then. Okay, then that takes us to water management strategies. Is there anybody that wants to speak to that? Maybe a representative of the municipal or public suppliers and ag?
I can do it unless someone else feels strongly.
Pete, good. We're
okay.
I think Brad
Pete.
would want to speak, or Angel on the ag.
Angel, are you still online?
We'll put him in.
Brad O'Neill's not here, but he spoke at our, one of our meetings. I don't remember that.
Okay, I can leave this as an action item to follow up and hopefully get someone from ag. Okay. Then the plan recommendations and the implementation plan. Right now we have this as one speaker, but we could split that up too. Just to go through what the recommendations were. So the planning, policy, technical recommendations.
Do you recommend we split those up between people? Like one with policy, one that's technical?
We can do anything. If there's enough volunteers, we can split it up in many ways. And so let's see, for recommendations, if anyone is more comfortable speaking to a certain subset of these, the technical and programs talking about the groundwater model, the drought study, incorporating future uncertainties. If there's anyone that feels strongly about any of these recommendations and wants to speak and expand on why it's important.
I can do it if no one else.
Okay. Anyone else?
Just flip through the other slides real quick.
Okay. Planning process, general outreach and education, annual statewide meeting, and continued funding of water planning activities.
Wonder if Dean would be willing to take some, especially the planning process recommendations.
He probably would. He'd be good.
Seeing his involvement with feedback.
Okay.
Or
yes, Dean has been voluntold.
there you go, Courtney.
Do we want to volunteer Dean, and we'll follow up with him and ask, but for the planning process and policy legislative recommendations?
He would probably take the policy ones too. What's that? So is it 3 slides on the recommendation before you
Yeah,
get to
there's 3. The
implementation?
first one's the technical and program. So you could let Pete take that one and then ask Dean to do the next 2.
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, let's do that. And then for the implementation plan is the last piece. And I guess the call to action as part of that.
Ken,
And
do you and I
whoever's
want to take
speaking to
those two?
these, we'll
Yeah.
send out the slides and
Carrie and I
anyone
do
can
those.
revise.
Carrie and I
Sorry.
Carrie and I will close the meeting together.
Okay. Great.
We'll split up the implementation plan and the call to action.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So we'll add the speaker names to these slides once we revise them and send them out. And we'll follow up with the speakers again before the public meeting, just to coordinate everything. And if anybody wants to make changes to the slides that they're presenting, just let us know.
And if we left anyone out, if anyone wants to take one of these, Bill, if you want to jump in there and take one, just kind of thinking of others who may want to.
No,
Please let us know.
I'm thinking about going fishing all day and then showing up there with a bucket of fish. That's what I'm thinking about. It's good fishing at Lake Warren.
Will that be the giveaway to any members of the public that come? They can win Bill's fish.
Yeah, and if anyone has any ideas about getting people there,
Yeah.
I mean, I think we have a great group with creative ideas. We could.
Hey, Grace.
Yeah.
This is Scott. I don't know when our next planning team meeting is, but I would like to discuss the success they had in the Saluda. And I don't think we can reproduce what they did in the Saluda necessarily, but think through like what can we take from what they did and how can we try to incorporate some of that.
Absolutely.
That's when I need to have this conversation sooner than later to kind of plan. So
we currently have one scheduled for June 19th, Scott, for the planning team meeting. So that's 2 weeks.
Yeah.
If that works.
Yeah, can we reschedule that meeting?
Yeah, that's the same day as the Water SC meeting.
Yeah, it's the same day as Water SC meeting. That's the main reason. But also maybe we could try to meet a little sooner, maybe. Do you mind trying to?
Yeah, I can try and set something up with that group.
Thank
Sooner
you.
would be better for me too.
Okay.
So we'll just send out an email about planning team meeting after the meeting today.
Okay. That sounds good. So we're just about at the end of our meeting. So I think we can push this discussion of term limits till our next meeting. There's nothing urgent with this, but please just think about before we meet again, which will also probably be virtually, to discuss changes to the plan based on public feedback and any final revisions, and then do that final test of consensus on the plan. So then when we meet at that point, we'll also go through and focus on those RBC members that had 2-year terms and ask if you will want to continue on for another 3 years. After this initial selection of term limits that was done, all subsequent term limits are 3 years. And then an answer is not urgent for the RBC members with 3- and 4-year terms, but it would help DES with planning and trying to make sure that there is sufficient representation from all the water use categories to know if anyone is planning to drop off or resign prior to the end of their term. Okay, so we have settled on a public meeting date for mid-late July, the 22nd. Scott's going to look into the space in Hampton that we discussed, and hopefully it's available then. But we can regroup as a planning team and reach back out to the RBC if there is any issue with that. So then once we incorporate public feedback, we'll plan to have that virtual RBC meeting to address any of the comments and revisions and do the final vote on the plan. It'll probably be late August based on the timing of our public meeting. And then we'll issue a final plan after that, sometime in the August-September timeframe. So with that, that concludes our meeting today. Thank you, everybody, for the thoughtful discussion, conclusions we reached, and getting a vote on our draft plan.
Good job.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your work.
Okay.
Bye, everyone.
Great. Thank you all. We'll be in touch.
See ya.
Thanks, guys.